What a time to be a political commentator and to have the kind of history of political science and this remarkable reservoir of knowledge that this guy has. He's forgotten more about politics than most of us will ever know. He is with us whenever he can possibly do it, from airport runways and, rental car buses. He'll always try to be here. Gotta love him. Michael Shure, everybody.
Well,
Hello,
I guess
sir.
we get right into the Keir Starmer stuff.
Yeah. For those joining us late, who doesn't that's the new government in Britain. He's the new prime minister. We're gonna backburner that and get right into the Joe Biden situation. He,
I hadn't prepared.
oh, I'm sorry. Well, Michael, it feels as though the realities of this situation bring an inevitability to him dropping out. Can you do the calculus and give me your thought?
I don't disagree, but I also think that we're in such a hurry all the time. There are 7 weeks till the convention. This is a process. A president doesn't just stand down from re-election immediately, like you fire a coach because they lost a game. There's a lot that goes into it, and he is entitled more than anyone to come to that decision on his own, and to also try to see if he can resuscitate his campaign. It looks unlikely. It looks like it's not the elephant in the room because everybody's talking about it. But were he to remain in the race and it to go on, it would still be the first question out of every reporter's mouth to anyone on his staff, his team, and himself, were he to put himself in front of the press. So I don't really see a way forward for him. But I do feel as if the party and the people around him have to give him that way forward for the moment. And it won't be abused, I don't think.
How big a deal is losing all of these high-profile donors?
Well, it's a huge deal. There's a lot of money in the bank, but there's a general election to be run. There's going to be more messaging that needs to be done now than there was before in light of what happened at the debate. So here's the thing: you lose those donors, but I think you lose them in a threatening way right now. If you don't drop out, we're not going to support you. But if the opposite is Donald Trump and you need that money, and Joe Biden, President Biden, is the candidate going forward, and there isn't a change at the top, money will come back. Maybe not as much, but money will come back. I think people are loath to give money to Joe Biden right now at the top of that ticket when they're not sure that they're giving it to the person who's going to remain at the top of that ticket. So I think that's really what you're dealing with now more than anything. And as soon as there is a new candidate, should he stand down, then I think then the money will come back pretty quickly. And if he remains in the race, I think a lot of it will come back.
The polling, which I know you have disdain for,
yeah, but I don't have disdain. I don't have disdain for the immediate polling after an event like that. I mean, that is relevant and acute, and I think that kind of polling is good. And I think that polling after conventions can sometimes be a fool's errand because you build in a bump, but then the polls are going to start to matter a lot, and I think they do now because we've had an unprecedented change in the narrative of this election.
Well, thank you, because that was the poll I was going to point to. I mean, he's lost 6 percentage points, and he's, it's now not just swing states. He's now behind in states that we thought he would carry.
Right. And here's what I would caution with that is that if he stays on the ballot, those numbers will come back a little bit. They may not recover, and there certainly isn't going to be this sort of rush to get those numbers back. But I think you're seeing also a reflection of dissatisfied Democrats who say it's okay to not support, who feel like it's okay now finally to not support Joe Biden. Were he to remain in the race, be the nominee, I think some of those numbers would crawl back to certainly closer. But I don't think, I think there is damage that has been done.
It's odd, and we talk about it a lot. We talked about it a lot in the first hour, and I'm sure we'll talk about it a lot in the days ahead. It's odd that it takes all the media oxygen and the toxicity, in my view, that is on the other side. That is to say, your option is so poisonous. The kind of America you'll live in under a Donald Trump administration is so scary that there is almost no choice. And I always say I take Biden on a hospital gurney against Donald Trump. But my point is simply that's me.
Yeah.
Is the way it works out in these situations that people just don't pull the lever for president? It's not as though they go to Trump. They also see Trump. They must see the distinct difference, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, I assume. I think it's too early to tell, but they saw this. I mean, or it's we already know the answer, which is 2020. That more people saw what they knew of Donald Trump and they voted for Joe Biden, even though he was not, a consensus. He was elected because they felt like he could beat Trump in a strange year, in the middle of a pandemic, and so I think that it's a little bit different right now. And I think that this kind of timeout from labeling the other side is certainly temporary, right? I mean, the media is focused on what is a massive story, an unprecedented story in the history of the American presidency. So I understand that. It doesn't mean they're not going to go right back to Donald Trump and his campaign, and that Trump has kind of taken a timeout now. He got some good news from the Supreme Court last week. He also was going to name a vice presidential candidate. Now he'd be a fool to do that because all the media attention that's on Biden only helps him. And it may change who he picks, were it to be Vice President Harris at the top of the ticket or somebody else, but most likely the vice president. So I think that the focus is on the Democrats now. It won't remain there. This will be resolved one way or the other. And then there will be a focus on Donald Trump, which is going to be something that's going to make a lot of people not want to vote for him. But I think a lot of that is already built in.
I will double back to what would happen, maybe process, if you want to think of it that way, when it comes to replacing Biden. I'll double back to that in a moment, but I just want to stay in this area of the politics of what's going on, because you get somebody like Sanjay Gupta, the high-profile, I think he's a neuroscientist, neurosurgeon, who is on CNN, of course. He
coincidentally the host of Paging Dr. Gupta. What are the chances?
That's very good knowledge. I did
What?
not aware of that. But he's their medical correspondent, and he called for Joe Biden to undergo full neurological and cognitive testing, and he called for the results to be released. Now, just from a political standpoint, that strikes me as absurd. I mean, I think you have a diminished guy in Donald Trump. I mean, I don't know that, Donald Trump hasn't some of the same challenges that Joe Biden has. Maybe they're at different stages, maybe they manifest in different ways. But he also has, wild personality defects. But the point is, that kind of drumbeat for you need to take a cognitive test, Mr. President, and then the release of those results has to be something that the American people see. This is, I think, making it harder for Biden to clear the narrative with some interview with George Stephanopoulos.
Yeah, I don't think he will clear the narrative. I mean, a couple of things. Are we within our rights to know if the U.S. president has cognitive defects? Sure, especially when we're making a selection. But I think that it should go both ways. I think both men should get that test if it's called for. I think that it's part of the conversation about, an age limit for that office that will certainly happen in the years ahead. But I also bristle at some TV doctor saying that we've got to do this. I mean, it's attention grabbing and sensational. And I think the American people kind of know what they have with Joe Biden. They were a little more concerned after the last outing. I also go back to the State of the Union address. People talked about what great energy the president had, how they were confident in him. I didn't have that same feeling then. I thought he did a good job, and there was some responsive stuff that worked, but he's still an 81-year-old man with a slowed gait, and by his own admission, is not as good when he has to put in a longer day. And the American people, that for a lot of them, that's enough to know, right? I mean, what they want in a president. And I think that those are the kind of pieces of information that people make their mind up over, not whether he can name the first 5 presidents of the United States or whatever else is on those cognitive tests. But I understand wanting to kind of have a test to his capacity. I just think it would have to go both ways. And I think it's a distraction from what's at hand right now.
Now to process, Michael, if he does step back, the war chest that's his, only Kamala Harris has access to that, right?
Right. Yeah, that's right. And there's a question of the delegates. There are, Joe Biden has over 3,000 pledged Democratic delegates at the convention in August, and there are, uncounted, about 750 super delegates that aren't declared till they get there, but they wouldn't make up that difference. So you'd have to think, looking at all of this, that the de facto candidate would be Kamala Harris. Now, whether or not the president were to resign, I don't think he will. I think that he would just do an LBJ and say, I'm not going to run for re-election, and then play out the string, and then Vice President Harris has that. And I think that it saves a big headache for the Democrats having that die be cast in such a way. I think that there's some curious backstage politics in this too. I mean, you see Gavin Newsom, who has the most to, I guess, lose if Harris is the nominee right away. They're both from the same state. He has a lot of the momentum, a lot of the fundraising. Were there to be an open seat in 2028. So those politics are quite interesting. It's kind of turns the table on that a little bit, and that's why he's saying, Joe, stay in, the president's fine. But I also think, and I think this is like a word of caution to people who follow this and have their mind made up on who Kamala Harris is. She brings a lot of help to this ticket. There is, people historically don't love the vice president. They don't know what the vice president does, especially in a time of social media where, the president made her the pivot person on immigration. Immigration has been such a disaster. The vice president is charged with a lot of unimportant, unheralded, and undone tasks. And really their purpose is to lift the ticket, to be a yes person for the president, and then also to be able to stand in for the president should something happen, the old heartbeat away thing. But who she is going to change the scope of this election. It's going to, in many ways, help Democrats because they had an unenthusiastic base. Unlike the base that Donald Trump has, who are going to rallies in negative 20-degree weather and waiting for 4 hours to hear him speak. And so what Harris can do is, for example, with black voters, with women, get people who might have been on the fence or not excited about Joe Biden, give them more of a reason. You're also going to see something that none of us can anticipate, not me, not you, nobody, which is this energy, the exuberance, the fast pace of a candidate opposite Donald Trump in this race that we haven't seen before, should she be the nominee or anyone else, frankly. It's not just reserved for Harris. The other thing is a lot of what has Democrats, looking at the other side more than before are these law and order issues. And her position when attorney general and district attorney on law and order issues in Northern California and in the state of California left a lot of Democrats uncomfortable, but it might be just the right flavor for these times. And that is something that they can maybe win back some support on were she to be the nominee. They're going to lose some people too. And there are people whose minds are already made up about the vice president, but it's going to change the scope of this. And I would reserve judgment on who she is as a national candidate until that happens, because it's going to be very different from where it stands right this second. And again,
such a wonderful point about her history as a prosecutor, because this is a country that seems to be tacking toward that law and order, that more moderate rather than progressive view toward law and order. And the typical, in fact, it's out there right now on Kamala Harris, the typical slam from the left I'm talking about is, she jailed all these brothers and sisters. You know what I mean? This I saw that from a couple of different leftists. One was a preacher, one was a pundit. But in any case, I think that you're right. In a country that seems to be quacking more and more in a moderate way, she actually may land more cleanly with that history than will it be problematic for her.
And she'll be able to articulate it in a way that this 81-year-old president, doesn't have to, and may not be as energetic about doing. And when I say doesn't have to, he's already the president. He has an administration. They have an agenda. He's accomplished what he's accomplished. He's not going to be called upon to answer in maybe more than just a question or two, but in a sort of philosophical way. She can define what the party says going into this election on an issue that is bothering a lot of people. And she can say, look at my record in California. Now, it might piss off a lot of progressives, but it's also going to make a lot of people more comfortable, as you know, and people in the middle. I think that it's not all rosy, but there are rosy things to find with the vice president.
So I'll ask you, can she win?
Yeah, absolutely. I think beating Donald Trump is not that difficult, and I think that Kamala Harris, once she, gets her footing, and that people see who she is, aside from assuming who she is, I think that's going to be a different person that comes out. And look, when you're the nominee of a party, I mean, Mike Dukakis was even elevated in stature. The people who don't seem to have the stature, and I'm not saying she doesn't have stature, because she does. She's charismatic. She's successful. She has been elected to, many different things, including the vice presidency on a national ticket. I think that perceptions do change when that happens of who that person is. Also, people become more forgiving when they have a nominee. People will vote for, and we see it. I mean, we see Ted Cruz voting for Donald Trump. People just become more forgiving when the die has been cast.
I want to ask you about down ballot races, because there's been a lot of concern among other Democrats who are running for office.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could just speak to that. Take it in any way you want, but it's definitely something that's been talked about in a more problematic way than before the debate performance from Joe Biden.
Yeah, look, I think it's obviously very hypothetical. I would imagine that some of these Senate races are going to be hurt by Joe Biden's performance, in that an electorate, a Democratic electorate or a Republican electorate, but in this case, the Democrats, less enthusiastic about voting for the top of the ticket, right? And who does that hurt? It hurts the people at the bottom of the ticket every time. Rarely do you see success go in opposite ways. My favorite one example of that was Al Gore winning Pennsylvania over George W. Bush, and Rick Santorum, one of the most conservative senators maybe in American history, but certainly in our modern time, winning on the same night as Al Gore. It does happen that you see these kind of quirky things happen. But I think it's going to hurt Senate candidates, and I think House candidates may benefit, because in those tight races, energy matters more than it does in a statewide race. In a district race, it can matter a lot. Also, she's a Californian, and a lot of the seats that are swing seats are Californian seats. They're more comfortable and more familiar with Kamala Harris as a candidate on their ballots. It sounds silly and sounds basic, but it does translate. They're going to be comfortable and more excited probably about coming out to the ballot box if, in fact, Harris is at the top of the ticket.
There's a narrative emerging. This is the attack ad narrative, and it is these senators and congresspeople were aware of the diminished capacity of Joe Biden and were complicit, in effect, in keeping it from you, the American people. That's the attack ad. I've seen one of them already. And I wonder, and this is something you can't really answer, and I love to ask you questions that you can't really answer, but could that get traction? These people, all of them, these senators, the Democrats across the board, they all knew this is all part of a conspiracy to keep that information from you, the American voter. Does that get traction?
I mean, my predictive analysis would be, like, for a minute, and with some people who are looking for conspiracies, and their conspiracies gain traction with those people all the time. I don't think it's going to matter big picture. I don't think there seems to have been a cabal of people other than the White House itself, the administration. Also, it makes sense, right? I mean, you have a president who is older, who misspeaks, who has authored successful legislation, who has been out on the hustings campaigning. I mean, but you're shielding him because of the things that we saw during the debate. And so I mean, that's also good team play. If you have an injured player, you're not going to tell the whole league that the player is injured. I know it
Yeah.
matters. I know it matters in presidential politics because he is the commander in chief and there are decisions that need to be made. And I think that's important. And I think that we've done it before in the past. They did it with Roosevelt. They hid, the fact that he was in a wheelchair. With Reagan, they hid his diminishing competence, mental competence. So I think that's sort of natural human nature. You shield the ones around you, but I think it matters. But I don't think it's going to stick. The conspiracy side of it will. I think it's they kept the media department kept him off the stage.
Right, of course, and they should have kept him off the stage that night. Michael, Kamish, you know what Michael is besides just being a hockey fan? He's a great sports fan. Michael Shure is a big tennis fan.
He is, yes.
Yeah. Let me just see this. Sorry, I can't see this comment. I heard some commentators say that Biden saved democracy. I'll get back to tennis in a second. I'm sure that's a great comfort to 2% of the audience that watches tennis. Yeah. I heard some commentators say that Biden saved democracy by running, and he can save democracy again by resigning. Well, that's certainly. Thank you, Trevor Starr in Hollywood.
I wouldn't. So I don't know about resigning. I think maybe not running. I don't think he saves democracy by resigning necessarily, but that's certainly an opinion that I could have a conversation about. But I think what in a sense, what people elected Joe Biden for, Democrats, many of them who voted for Joe Biden, said, okay, here's a guy who can hold our hands, older man, take us out of the abyss, and then just hand us off to the next person. And I think a little of that's been lost. I think that was Joe Biden's opportunity. And I think had he said, I'm not going to run for re-election last year at some point when I was predicting he would, I think he would have looked a lot better. He had a good record as a president, still has a good record as a president on the numbers by which we measure presidents. And his legacy would have been in stone as one of the most effective one-term presidents in U.S. history. Now he's going out in a blaze of confusion. And if that's the case, and I think it tarnishes it a little bit. And like your listener viewer said, it messes with it a little bit. That doesn't mean that he can't be a hero by not running again, but the heroism is tempered a little bit because it seemed not to come from within. It came from outside.
Delwood says Mark chose to ignore all the signs of Biden's decline, even as late as this past week. Well, actually, this past week, I don't know what you're talking about. Once I'd seen Thursday, I was beginning to question. But to your point, Delwood, I think I believed, and I think that there's frankly pretty good evidence that the guy was a good administrator, and the administration that he had chosen, managers and cabinet officials, et cetera, had done some really great things. In other words, I didn't see the manifestation of problems of mental acuity in the administration of Joe Biden. I mean, of course, I listened to press conferences and all the rest, and I always thought, well, the guy drones on. He's halting in his manner. He was an old man. But I certainly didn't see the kind of breakdown that I saw on stage. So you're not wrong. You're wrong about chose to ignore. I mean, if I had known all of these things, I would not have been as full-throatedly behind him. So I think that's a little bit rude, but I understand, what you mean.
Also to that point is that, that chose to ignore thing is that's not true, right? You didn't choose to ignore anything. We knew who he was. We knew that he was an older man, remains an older man. And we have to remember, too, on Joe Biden's best days, when he was at his most confident, cognizant, when his mental acuity was at its top, he was still not great at debates. He was still not great at public speaking. And he was a good orator, but he was not good at sort of making a point and coming up with an answer very quickly. This is not someone who was, he was elected many times to the Senate from Delaware, a small state, an insular state, and a state that at that time, Wilmington, Delaware, the center of banking in this country. And I think that's really, I think what he is. I don't think that Joe Biden surprised many people, just that he seemed pretty tired and pretty out of it the other day. But he did surprise a lot of people. But I don't think that that this is something that has been ignored. We've known about it, but maybe now it's time to rethink whether he's at the top of the ticket.
And we noted before, and I saw the comment up there, hiding, lying, Trump was a liar, and now the Democrats are a liar, lying about Biden's condition, hiding it from the general public is wrong. Again, FDR is a classic example. I mean, effective presidency, and they were hiding his illness and his infirmity all the way. Again, it was sort of common knowledge on one level, but it was certainly not something they were, issuing a press release over. So again, there's
The people rally to protect the person that they're paid to protect in a way too. I mean, the cabinet protected Bill Clinton after his foibles. Richard Nixon's group came together until they didn't. I mean, it's the first instinct is to protect, and if they have a commodity and they have the power, they want to keep it. And be that as it may, that's just sort of human nature.
Well, this is a point I've made before on the show, but apparently I guess Lawrence O'Donnell made it as well, probably more effectively than I've ever made it. But John says, see Lawrence O'Donnell's show from last Friday? He describes the actual job of being president. And the job is not to give 90-second answers to press questions. No, of course. But sadly, as I made the point in the first hour, in this media environment, you do need to communicate well enough to. That's really all Trump has. Yeah. Trump has no ability to administer. He's a golfer and a guy who watches Fox and Friends. That's all he is. But boy, he's out there and he's spinning it. And Biden, just the opposite. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I mean, while whatever Lawrence said, I didn't see the show. It's true. It isn't about 90-second sound bites and questions, but it's also about 90-second sound bites and questions. And so I think that has to be, you're projecting America around the world. And if that's how the country, not everybody tunes into the stuff every day like we do all day long. The country watches a debate in big numbers and they see that. They're like, this is not really the person I want to be going to the G7. This is not the person I want to be handling, a hurricane crisis. This is not the person I want to be putting forward a budget or, deciding whether or not we send men into battle.
That's what Trump was saying, on the golf course when they got him. You saw that video. It's like, you got to be tough against General Xi. Let me tell you, that guy's he's a bruiser. And you think Biden, that piece of crap's going to be able to, so you open yourself up to that now.
There was a hockey question that flew by. Sadly,
was there a hockey question, Albert?
It's too bad.
Anything? Yeah, it was in reference of the handling of the Stanley Cup. So the Florida Panthers won, and Matthew Tkachuk famously took the Stanley Cup to the Atlantic Ocean. So
yet the game staffer handles the cup with gloves on. There's not a second cup. There are the rings of the other cup, and there is actually a second cup that sits a replica cup that sits that sits at the Hockey Hall of Fame. But the guys, it's not the team, it's not the staffer, there's a guy named Phil Pritchard who is the keeper of the cup. He spends his entire life like taking the cup around the country and around the world. And so wearing the gloves and shining it, that's for show. It's big moment when they hand it off. They want it to look good, and then it's going to get destroyed, and then they repair it later on.
What does the keeper of the cup job pay?
I don't know. I'm going to run for it, but I don't. There he is. There's Phil Pritchard, and he's got the gloves on, and then it's handled terribly. But it's sort of like I don't know. If you buy something nice and in the store they treat it nicely and you get it home and you don't treat it as nicely, the same kind of thing.
Yeah. Michael, thank you. We're out of time. Can't even talk tennis with you. Appreciate you here, though.
Can't even talk tennis. Okay, well, it's okay.
I don't know. It's a great match today
it was.
on Senate Court, and looks like a great Wimbledon. So, and your boy, Patrick McEnroe, is... I will tell you something. Michael's friend is Patrick McEnroe.
We got to get him on this show, Mark. I mean,
well, I'll tell you what. Again, I may have said it before, but it really struck me again this year.
Yeah,
he has. I mean, he was already really good, but he has become I think a really world-class broadcaster now in his ability to speak effortlessly, not just about the analysis and the analytical aspects of tennis and what's going on, but to speak about the event, its significance. He contextualizes things really well, and he does it in this just beautiful style. I'm really so happy. I don't know the man at all, but I think he's really grown into that role so beautifully. Gosh.
Yeah, and he's worked really hard at it. I will say that. Like, he's worked hard at it. He cares about it, and he does it really well. I mean, growing up, I never thought there'd be a time, where he wasn't in the tennis world, John McEnroe's brother. But I feel like right now with the broadcasting that John is Patrick McEnroe's brother.
I think that's right. I think that's really right. And so far, it has done me no good to know him through you. So
yeah, well, I'll have to get him on the show. Well,
that would be so much fun.
For you, he loves tennis fans. He can plug his podcast and his appearances and things like that. So we'll
look, the U.S. Open is coming, so maybe around that time. Or
I just don't want to lose my politics job to Patrick. That's
okay. Find him across social media. Find him across the web. Find him here on Fridays. Michael Shure, everybody. Thank you, pal. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.